Hello everyone, welcome to the Eternal Spoiler Breakdown. My name is Pojo. We have an exclusive spoiler for you tonight. It actually should be showing up, I think, in the upcoming decks. So when we have our spoiler event tomorrow, which will be starting up, you'll be able to play this card, I believe, in one of the new decks. So it should be interesting, but we are going to be talking about a lot of spoilers tonight first. So we're going to go over basically everything up from where we were previously. I think I'll miss a few, but for the most part, we're going to be talking about a big pile of cards. I think we have something like 20 or 30 to go through, and yeah, there's a lot of interesting stuff coming out of Flame of Xulta. So we've had a really nice chance to go through all the draft packs and play with a bunch of the draft cards, the commons and uncommons. I can say that this format is really, really fun. Like, all of the mechanics seem to be really, really rewarding. They have both interesting ranked level sorts of advantage and also some really interesting draft mechanics. Like Mastery is wildly fun in draft. It's actually like a lot more rewarding than Onslaught and Spark and some of the other sort of skills that we've seen so far. We have Decimate, and Decimate has actually been like really, really interesting. It's a fun draft mechanic because it makes Flood like really feel pretty good, and also like if you aren't decimating, you're usually not feeling too unhappy about it. So like there's a reasonable amount of good like uncommons and commons in draft that feel pretty fun to play, and then if you get the Decimate, like it's a nice little extra effect that doesn't cost you too much in terms of your future life, and I've actually been much happier with it than I was originally setting up. Exalted has been delightful. It's proven to be a really powerful mechanic. We've seen a lot of like good Exalted cards. Stand Strong has been an interesting trick. There's been some really cool stuff happening. Like basically there's just a lot of cool stuff happening in all of the different formats, and the draft environment has been insane. Like it's been so much fun. So really, really enjoying Flame of Xulta so far, and we haven't actually had Flame of Xulta release yet. But when it does come out, there's going to be a lot of interesting stuff happening. Amongst that is going to be some new tribal stuff. We have a lot more Oni pushing cards. Onis have been pushed for a while now, and like there continue to be more good Oni cards released. This one is actually really quite solid. It is called Acclaimed Artisan, and it is red-green for a 2-cost 2/3 that says your other Oni have +1 strength with Mastery 4 Exalted. So right away, the first thing that we want to know about an Oni tribal card is, can we play it without Oni? Like if we play this card down, are we going to feel pretty happy with it? And the answer is yes. Like this is a 2/3 that after 2 attacks turns into a 2/3 weapon whenever it dies, meaning that you are going to be getting some decent value out of it pretty much as long as you hit with it twice. It is a card with 3 health, which is important because you want to have 3 health to survive a number of different abilities. The Mastery ability means that people are going to be less willing to attack into it. In general, the ability to defend and get Mastery has been like a really, really big deal, and this is something that just stymies 2/1s and makes it really hard for them to sort of progress and get you the kind of setup it is. It's a 2-drop that draws a torch, which is basically, if the 2-drop draws a torch, the 2-drop is probably going to be good enough. If it's something where your opponent can just be like, I don't even care, and then they don't like they just get to use their torch on your 3-drop or your 4-drop, that's something that you're kind of looking for to not happen. Party. So it's pretty interesting. Cheers for the raid, e-moneybags. So yeah, Acclaimed Artisan seems interesting on that front. The other Oni have +1 ability is actually quite strong. We have a lot of good 1-drop Onis. We have a lot of good aggressive Onis. Onis are generally an aggressive strategy, and they need some sort of rally type effect at a very cheap price like this. And also, since this plays a weapon, this is going to be something useful because Oni generally synergize very well with weapon. Exalted might be the mechanic, and Oni might actually be in the right set to actually play some good Oni decks. I can see some actual tier 1 decks coming out of cards like Acclaimed Artisan and some of the other stuff that we're going to be running through. I think we're going to be running through mostly in alphabetical order, so let's take a quick look and see what else we can run. We got Bloodseeker, 1-cost 2/3. This is probably one of the most exciting ones that's been shown so far. At the end of your turn, Bloodseeker deals 1 damage to you, +2/+2 for each player with 10 or more cards in their void. So if you're a spiky player, if you want damage, then yeah, this is definitely something that gets you a lot of interesting things going on. So really, really aggressive stat line. 2/3 for 1 is very, very hard to deal with. There is notably another 2/3 for 1 in the set right now, and it doesn't have as big of a drawback. It is the time card that is a 0/1 and gets +1/+1 for each of your opponent's influence. That card's almost always going to be a 2/3 for 1, and it's not going to deal damage to you. So there are some like cards that are going to spar with Bloodseeker and make Bloodseeker a little bit more evened out. But as it stands, yeah, the numbers on this card are quite ridiculous. The fact that it turns into a 4/5 for 1 later in the game is really, really wild. I would say this card is definitely going to be a very strong, possibly tier 1 card in a large amount of aggro decks. It plays really well with like Argenport Instigator and a lot of the other like really pushed shadow cards. With this card, you can now play a lot of shadow cards without actually ever going below 2 health, meaning that you'll disable like snowballs, you'll disable piercing shot, you'll disable a number of interesting spells like char and other options, basically anything like piercing shot, Heart of the Vault. A lot of that value just goes away because your deck is just going to be very, very healthy, and this guy just is going to spar with them. The main problem with him, of course, is that he does do consistent damage to you, similar to Impending Doom, and that clock starts a lot faster. This card is going to deal, on average, 4 more damage to you than an Impending Doom is if it lives for the day. So if your opponent can find a way to ignore it, say permafrosting it, using cards like Thudrock's Masterwork or something like that to stun it, if you can put something on it that prevents it from attacking, or something on it that prevents it from blocking, if you can do anything that sort of makes Bloodseeker just continue to bleed at you, that's going to be an issue, which means that a Bloodseeker deck is going to have to play A, lots of lifesteal options, B, something that gives Bloodseeker innate lifesteal, which would be really, really strong. Basically anything where you can actually like negate the damage that the Bloodseeker is dealing will really, really help with this. Fortunately, the answer to that is usually Vara Vengeance Seeker, and she's a perfectly good curve topper in a shadow deck like this. So insanely aggressive card, really, really powerful. I do think that it suffers a little bit in the aggro matchups, like in the same way that Argenport Instigator can be bad in the aggro matchups. Like this card has a bigger drawback than Argenport Instigator. It's specifically a drawback for you, and it's not at all like bad for your opponent. And then like if you're playing up against like Skycrag aggro and they're just like running Permafrost and Torch, then it's like, oh, you played a Bloodseeker, let me play a Torch and a 1-drop. There's going to be some problems there. So there are matchups where it's not good, but it's clearly a very heavily pushed spike card that should see play in aggressive, like very solid Stone Scar, potentially even like some Feln nonsense or any other type of like aggro deck. Like this is wild aggro. It's really, really powerful. Definitely don't count it out. Burning Claw. 6/5, when one of your other Oni dies, draw each weapon it was wielding from your void. So right away, this is a pretty interesting effect. Like you can play this before attacking and then get a wild amount of interesting options when your opponent has to trade. 6/5 is not a bad stat line, so this is a solid uncommon for drafting environments in particular. I could even see it being played in ranked. Like it's a really reasonable stat line. It trades with Sandstorm Titans, so like if you're playing an Oni deck into like a Titan or something like that, and you've just got a bunch of units that are all like completely armored up, you play Burning Claw, you attack into the Titan, you probably don't feel too bad about that, and then you have Burning Claw to like block Titans if they decide not to block or get the sort of benefits out of that. This seems like a really well statted Oni. I don't know if it's like a tier 1 card. It seems like it's another Oni that's not necessarily going to push you to the absolute limit, but it does some wild things. It also works really well with the Exalted mechanic, which is going to be playing a lot of weapons in places that you wouldn't otherwise expect them. The Exalted mechanic means that there's going to be a lot more weapons in general. So does Spellcraft and Muster. So weapons are going to be all over the set. Flame of Xulta is going to involve a lot of different weapons and attachments. So Burning Claw has a lot more potential to be a really strong card in those types of situations. And Oni in general really thrive in places where there are a lot of weapons. So this is another card that really heavily pushes Onis. Gemenon's Choice. Oh no, this one's a higher resolution. Okay. There are always going to be some. We got a Triumphant Stranger there, but that's not a spoiler. That's just a Triumphant Stranger. Okay, so Gemenon's Choice. 2 cost, transform a unit into a 3/1 Flamefang with Reckless, or increase the damage of each spell in your hand by 1. Obviously, one of those is usually better than the other. Like getting a 3/1 Flamefang with Relic, Flame Fang on your opponent's things generally allows you to easily snowball options away, get rid of things like Sandstorm Titan. The card has Reckless, so you don't even have to necessarily deal with it if you're a perfectly healthy person that is just trying to get rid of your opponent's stuff. Gemenon's Choice is not a fast spell, so that's a little bit rough. I don't think this card's particularly powerful just because the Choice ability is not particularly strong. You really need a lot of spells in your hand for Gemenon's Choice to be very valuable, and the Transform ability, while strong at getting rid of cards, also does create a unit that deals some damage to you and makes things kind of bad. So like there's some situations where it's going to be strong, but you really have to kind of be ahead on board and on cards to reap the best advantage of this, and also to make the best choices with it. That being said, Skycrag can definitely get ahead on cards, even if they can't necessarily get ahead on board. So I can see this being played in like an Ixtun style deck, where you have a bunch of spells and a bunch of like interesting burn stuff, but you also have a little bit of time for the life gain and the ways to stabilize against the Flame Fangs, something like Lumen Defender, or basically anything where you get a bunch of life in addition to the other things that you're doing. There are definitely places that Gemenon's Choice belongs. It's a more specific choice than you might expect, but generally I think the choices have been pretty low powered for their modularity, and like that's been really good. Like the 3-color choices are where a lot of the strength lies. The 2-color choices are very good options for very specific kinds of decks that give you a little bit of flexibility and the ability to deal with threats that you wouldn't otherwise be dealing with. So this is definitely a good toolkit card for that reason. We recently saw Harmony of Flame spoiled. This card is a 4-drop that says you get +1 power this turn for each of your units and reduce the cost of each spell in your deck by 1. So notably, this does cost 4 to play, so you have to have at least 4 units to get the power back, and then you're still down a card if that happens. But reducing the cost of the spells could be really interesting. I think there's a deck for this. I think there's a wombo combo of some kind. It could be something along the lines of a Glimpse spell deck, where you are playing, say, a bunch of different spells, trying to reduce the cost of them with Harmony of Flame, and then like just playing multiple Harmony of Flames to get yourself to a 0-cost setup where you are just drawing lots of cards, doing ridiculous nonsense, playing insane amounts of power, and doing all sorts of wild stuff. Yeah, we got some sites coming up, yes. So this is going to be pretty interesting. Like, overall, I certainly don't hate it, but like it's really specific. You obviously can't get great value out of it early on. The maximum amount of damage that Harmony of Flame can generate, or the maximum amount of power that Harmony of Flame can generate, is a total of 12. So paying 4 for 12 gets you up 8 power. This is the most power that you can potentially gain. Allows you to Flame Blast in like a big giant tokens deck, which is kind of interesting, but like for the most part, it seems like the reduce the cost of each spell in your deck ability is the part that's interesting, and that notably comes with a lot of potential disadvantages. But warp decks, things that have like interesting shenanigans available, like say Tolir's Unwinding, there's some possibilities with this card that might actually be really interesting, and it's possible that Grodov might have some combo pieces available in the future. All right, Intrepid Longhorn. This little friend is a 3/3 for 2. Definitely not bad. There are very few 3/3 for 2s in the game. They are all really good cards just for their base value, and they do tend to have like these extra value. So this is an insane common to get in Cambria if you're playing a draft, because he's just like a Minotaur Mage that is immediately capable of sparring with anything your opponent plays. The Mastery ability plays a random sigil from your deck. It's a pretty minor mastery, but it triggers Empower abilities in Cambria, meaning that you can play it alongside Awakened Students, Hojin, and other nonsense to get some pretty interesting results. It's pretty hard to get Hojin to work with this, but like overall, just the extra like sort of rampant value that you're getting out of this is going to be a fairly big deal. It is not depleted power, which means you do get basically a free power to play on the turn, so you are going to ramp immediately on the turn that you play it, meaning you can play a 5-drop on turn 4. Not bad. Some interesting stuff happening there. It is a random sigil. It is not a random power, so keep that in mind. You can't play crests off of it. You do have to actually have a sigil. You can't play Waystones in this type of deck. But hey, that's a pretty good deal. I would say this deck probably belongs mostly in Cambria. If you play it in like 3 colors, you're not getting great value out of it. The random sigil is not usually going to be the color you want it to be. So this is probably almost a strictly Cambria card, and the random sigil in that case is a little bit strange. But hey, this card is not mono Justice, which is also nice. I do appreciate that it's not playing a Justice sigil from the deck, because that would be really irritating in the context of there's a lot of those cards that are currently playing just a ridiculous amount of Justice sigils, and it's nice to see something that can actually play some time and do some interesting options. Kadosh Sees All. This one, I think, just popped. 7 cost. At the start of the cursed player's turn, play a Griffin with flying and strength and health equal to the number of curses on the cursed player and their units. So we know that Unseen have been a thing with curses, and that they are a thing that is generally happening with curses. But Kadosh Sees All offers Griffins some synergy with curses, and that's important because there are actually some Griffins now that are going to be playing curses and that interact with curses. So Unseen Griffin Curses is sort of the equivalent of like Explorer Sentinel Relic in the world of Muria. This is like the Zoltan answer to that. It is green, blue, purple Unseen Griffin Curses versus the red, yellow, blue relics. Sentinels and Explorers. So really interesting things. Certainly does have a cool amount of stuff going on with it. It generates units every turn, and the units are permanent, which is pretty rare. Also, the units have a stat line that basically, they have an interesting ability that ends the game. So I like this a lot better than something like Svetch's Sanctum or Martyr's Chains, where the value that it's generating is somewhat non-situational and tends to like sort of lead to a very samey type of game. This card ends the game pretty well as well if you're playing a lot of different curses, but also there are some interesting ways to interact with it. There's a lot of like, if you do a bunch of attachment destruction, you're not forever behind because of like the big pop-off that happened. So this is a little bit more of a fair Justice Relic. That being said, a Fair Justice Relic is a little bit late to the game, so it's possible this card's not going to see a lot of play because there's a lot of Unfair Justice Relics at the moment that can do a lot more. But hey, we're pushing curses, so maybe this card actually gets some value. Certainly, it's an interesting card to be playing in a draft environment because it does get you just a wild amount of finishing power and could be pretty wild. Okay, Mage Breaker. This card is a 3/3 for 3 with a spellcraft of 2. Double fire to play, which is a little bit expensive, but you do get to play Unexpected Results if you have that Spellcraft 2, which is the card that turns a spell into your opponent's deck, not at random, into firebombs, all of the spells. So yeah, a reasonable option here. This is a pretty good weapon for just dealing some straight damage. If your opponent's playing like basically like a spell, a unitless list, then this gets you damage against them, something that's fairly hard to remove, and it shuts down a card in their hand that's going to be very, very important. So yeah, overall, this is just a wild amount of damage and a wild amount of power at 5. This is a pretty strong option. There's some interesting things going on with it. Double fire, I've mentioned before that like double fire influence is just one of the hardest influence numbers to hit, but like this is something you probably want to play at 5 most of the time, and at least defends you if you're playing in like a more ridiculous type of deck. So it's pretty cool. I think it's got some potential in like control or aggro lists, and should be really interesting to see in the future. Okay, Marizo, Gladiator Hero. Okay. Everything is the wrong size. Okay, 7/7 for 7. Exalted Mastery 10. Play 3 units from the top 10 cards of your deck, then discard the rest. So the rare stat is, this is definitely a draft bomb, so it's a really, really solid rare. That mastery is a little hard to hit, but not like insanely hard to hit. I would say that like basically any mastery that is 3 above you is just going to be very strong in draft because there are a lot of different spells that will get you up +3, and most of them are going to be fast. You've got your High Alert, you've got your Finest Hour, you've got your basically like any of your shenanigan tricks. Most cards will get you up that extra +1, +3, meaning that you can get the Exalted in, or they get the mastery in 1 attack, which is a pretty big deal. Marizo really needs to be killed immediately, and since he has a 7/7, that means that if you have another unit on board when you play Marizo, you're feeling really happy because basically killing Marizo means that you have one other threat that you have to deal with. He's not immune to sweepers, he's not like insanely like ridiculous or anything like that, but certainly the fact that this card has Exalted really makes that mastery a lot more interesting. The play 3 units from the top 10 cards of your deck is absurd and will generally win you the game if you get it going, but also this card is like not what you would call immediate value. So since he doesn't have a summon effect or anything crazy going on, I don't think he's going to be like a tier 1 card. Clearly he belongs in some great tier 2 decks and like some like other stuff where you are going to be playing, you know, a more situational type of deck with a very specific build that's going to be fun to play. Serious draft bomb, obviously, but like ranked wise, he's close to playable and he's really, really fun to play. There's potentially some ways that he could just break the game wide open, which is always interesting to see. Okay, we are not going to do that one because that's our spoiler. We're going to talk about that one last. Rujin Conflict Within, exalted while you have other Oni, which, okay, if you have any Oni, it's exalted. If you don't have Oni, well, then you're probably playing an all Oni deck, so it basically just reads exalted. Like, it's not really a big deal. But if you're not playing a lot of Oni, then you got some other things going on. Summon, kill an enemy unit with fewer battle skills than your Oni have. Oni are not known for a ridiculous number of battle skills, so it's a little bit harder to get this kind of setup going, but also, this kills like almost any vanilla unit if you have a single Oni Ronin out. So it breaks down like, you can't quite get a Sandstorm Titan with it, but if you have like a Charge Oni and a Warcry Oni, you can get a Sandstorm Titan with it, and that's pretty fun stuff. So yeah, fewer battle skills is a really interesting thing to have, and this card is very, very strong. 6/6s that kill an enemy unit when they come out are traditionally like defining cards in the meta. There is one exception, and that has been Jack, which is the Onslaught card. This is something that triggers before combat, which means that you can do some pretty wild stuff. Jack's a tribute, actually, which is even harder than Onslaught. Yeah, so this card's really, really good. Like, basically, this is the big legendary push for Oni. Gives you a really easy option to get rid of a very big threat for your Oni, and also, like, basically just continue to push and pressure with Oni when you are rolling that ball of Oni across the floor. So, like, this is something that definitely gets you there. Has the right stats for it. She seems excellent. I think she does a lot of useful things. Also, she appears to be like kind of enormous, which is interesting. Like, she's just a lot bigger than these assassins. It might be a perspective thing, but does have like the bardic thing going on that is very common to Rakano cards lately. Love seeing it. Really cool with Navani Warsinger and some other options. Like, certainly works with Warcry Oni to get rid of like some pretty interesting threats, and as long as the card isn't too complicated, kills a lot of things that are going to be very, very valuable. So seems really reasonable, especially since, like, if you're, you know, like, basically if you, like, this could roll in sort of rock, paper, scissors with, like, silence and a bunch of, like, skill-based stuff. You could do some really interesting things with it. I think it's a powerful card that actually pushes Oni into the forefront and allows for Oni decks to finally be a real thing that people play, which has been such a ride getting there. Slayer's Edge. Summon, draw a treasure trove for each different name among your dragons. Okay, this is pretty interesting. It's not quite Auric Runehammer levels of good. In fact, there is a 5/2, I think for 4. There's a 5/3 for 4, actually. So stats are a little bit awkward, and the summon ability is once again that draw a treasure trove for each different name among your dragons. So we've seen a lot of these cards with like the draw a treasure trove for each different name among your dragons. I'm not a terrible fan of this keyword being so often repeated. We already have a lot of treasure trove cards, and treasure troves are notoriously kind of unusual draw. They are something that's like a little bit slower. They certainly do get you a lot of value. You can do some wild things with them. They play as spells, which means you can set up Moment of Creation and do other shenanigans with them. Like, we've seen a lot of things with treasure troves already, so people already sort of know what these types of cards are about. Different names among your dragons is a pretty hard setup to fulfill, but it also means that dragons become a much higher value target than they already were, which means that you are generally going to see less of your dragons because people are going to be removing them a lot, meaning that cards like Slayer's Edge tend to be a lot less useful. I'm suspect as to how good these types of keywords are. Like, I think that in general, if you have a lot of dragons, you're already winning the game. And you're not going to be too unhappy about, like, basically, like, you're not going to be super happy with something that basically doesn't give you a lot of board advantage. So these cards tend to sacrifice board advantage to get you card advantage after you've already played dragons. That protects you from, like, sweeper effects, but I just don't know if it really supports dragons in the way that it, like, seems like it should. It is a really cool, like, flavor thing. Like, I really like that dragons come with their own treasure troves. I think that, like, the more treasure troves you are getting off of dragons, the more dragons are replacing themselves and just sort of, like, valuing out. That's really interesting mid-range stuff, but, like, we haven't really seen that work too much yet. Zoe is one of the big exceptions, and Zoe is basically played without any other dragons because Zoe can just always do treasure troves. So, yeah, I'm curious to see how these cards turn out. I hope that they're really good. I like dragons a lot, and but also, like, I want to see dragons do some other things, some more interesting things in general, more explosive. They're big Timmy cards, and these are sort of big control setups. All right, we talked about Griffins a little bit. Soothing Shortbeak is a 3/1 flyer for 3 that says summon, play a -1 curse on 2 enemy units. That's good enough for ranked. The stat line on it is pretty vulnerable, but because it immediately disables 2 tokens, you can get rid of Grenadin with this, basically, turn them off, and, like, nobody's going to spend the time to remove curses from Grenadin, so that's, like, a specific meta value that it actually has where you get some sort of benefit out of it. It's also one of the better statted 3-drops in flying that I've ever seen. Like there's a 1/1 for flying. Most of the flyers at 3 are going to be 1/1s. Like there's not that many that actually do this much. There's like a couple of 2/2s and like there's like a couple of 3/3s as well, but like it's basically Valkyrie Enforcer at this cost. I think this card is playable in ranked. Just even though it's snowballable, this seems like something that you're going to get some value out of. And the curses that you get out of it are going to be reasonable enough effects that even if your opponent snowballs it, like you get a good benefit out of it. You get some pseudo removal on top of a flyer that actually puts a clock on your opponent. I think that's worth it. So yeah, it seems interesting. It's not quite Valkyrie Enforcer levels of awesome, but it is nonetheless very powerful and plays pretty well alongside Valkyrie Enforcer. As a Griffin, it seems quite strong, and it pushes curses, which is allows you to play a lot of Curse Matters cards on top of this card. This is the big enabler for that setup, and I think that actually belongs in potentially even a tier 1 deck. So seems really interesting. Don't let that 1 health fool you. This card is stronger than it looks just because of that on-hit summon effect that is, we know that those effects are not the best type of removal, but actually influencing the board in some way on a flyer is a pretty big deal at 3. Tota Colony, 4-drop, 2/6. This is going to be crazy mastery stuff. Mastery 4, create and draw 4 0/1 Totemites. Mastery 6, each unit and weapon in your hand gets +4 strength and overwhelm. So, yeah, it's a pile of Totemites. You do have to get the mastery to get more Totemites. I seem to recall the Totemites can be sacrificed for power, but I don't remember if that's only with... I think that might actually be with a specific relic. I have some... It's an unusual card, let's say that much. The Mastery 6 is wild. This +4 and overwhelm on units and weapons in your hand and your deck is a pretty interesting stat line and certainly works well with like any sort of like shenanigans. This also works well with other Tota Colonies because it turns them into 6/6s, which then can get their Mastery 6 over and over again. So interesting things. Yeah, they're unusual. I don't know really what to make of this card in general. Like I think it's probably not terribly strong in ranked, but it's a really fun draft card to play around with, so seems well worth it. There is a little kid. Everyone's excited about the little kid or confused about the little kid. I think it's just a sort of an example of how obnoxious these cards are. Have we done Waylay yet? The enemy player discards each copy of a unit or site of their choice from their deck, so big cranial extraction. The Decimate here is steal the enemy player's void. So for a spell that has no onboard impact and costs 3, this is pretty interesting. I would say that shutting off your opponent's void by stealing it is one of the more interesting ways to actually do that kind of action, and this is the cheapest we have ever seen that effect happen. So this is something that you can actually use to very effectively turn off your opponent's Reanimator deck while fueling your own in pretty rabid style. I wouldn't say that it's going to be amazing, but it seems like a really solid market card. Beyond that, like, I don't know if you want to play multiple copies of this. That kind of cranial extraction sounds pretty rough, especially since you don't get the card in their hand, so you can't get any hand advantage out of it at all. Overall, it's not very strong, but the stealing of the enemy player's void is wild, and this is certainly a really good safety valve for all sorts of interesting combos. So, yeah. All right. A through W. My last card is actually one of my favorites just for style, Wizened Crone. I just really like that a card called Wizened Crone is in fact a Yeti. Like this is a piece of Yeti flavor that we've never seen before, which is really, really nice. We see an old Yeti. I think there was sort of a general impression that Yeti sort of grew up to be Jotun, but it looks like the Jotun Burst song is in fact like a completely different thing going on, and Yeti can in fact grow old and be Yeti all the time. Yeah, it is also one of the first potentially female Yetis. I don't know. It's very hard to tell with Yetis, of course. But yeah, 2/1, your spells deal +1 damage. That's a really good stat line. Like overall, like +1 damage is not something that you get very often. Currently, you get it on a 2/2 for 3. You get it on a 3/3 in flying. There isn't a 2-drop that gives you spell damage, and that means that this card immediately fills a void in any sort of spell damage based deck. I think that playing this into a torch is pretty strong. I think this card enables like a wild amount of interesting options. There are a bunch of spells that already synergize with it pretty well. Spell damage is interesting. This is like the kind of Greed's reward that you really want to see. Once this is in draft, Greed's Reward will be a lot better because Wizened Crone just comes at common, which means that you can do some incredibly cool things in draft with this card and have a really, really fun time. It's fun with Temporal, with any sort of like damage-based effect that is one-sided, like Icequake, but that's not the one I'm thinking of. I'm thinking of Torrential Downpour. I almost said Temporal Downpour. Yeah, I like this card a lot. The design's really fun. It definitely provides a new deck archetype while being a solid 2-drop common. The snowball ability of it means that it's not going to be tier 1 most of the time, but it's still really fun, and I think spell damage stuff is probably going to play with it pretty frequently. Okay. Yeah, the next thing we have to talk about, we have a couple of cards. Oh yeah, now we talk about the big cards, I think. So, this little friend. Let's show off the big guy first. He was spoiled a couple of games ago, but here we go. We got Voprex Hope's Ends. This nonsense 8-drop is an 8/8 with Flying and Overwhelm that says summon, the enemy player must choose one of their units for each different name among your dragons, exhaust those units, and steal them while you have Voprex. So Voprex is delightful. I am delighted to see another Voprex card in general. I think this is a sweet-looking dragon. I really liked Voprex's original art, and I really like this art. This is like a really good use of like purple and red. It just does a lot of interesting things. The 8/8 Flying Overwhelm is a really nasty stat line, and then also you get to steal basically your opponent's entire board on the turn that it comes out, which generally leads to a bunch of your dragons bashing your opponent and doing ridiculous nonsense. Obviously, if Voprex dies, that gets really bad really fast, but you did exhaust the units when you stole them, so at the very least, Voprex Hope's End turns all of your opponent's flying blockers into immediate non-flying blockers, meaning that you get some pretty wild stuff. This card wins more when you're ahead, unlike Voprex The Great Ruin, which was more of a card that won when you were slightly behind, or when your opponent's board was very well balanced. This is, I would say, not an amazing legendary at 8, but it is nonetheless like real powerful. And because of that big exhaust effect, which I would call it an exhaust effect more than a steal effect most of the time, because this card is just guaranteed to get removed after it's played, I think this is just a really interesting way to win the game on turn 8 and just like get straight in for all of the damage that you want to get in with all of your dragons. So that's a pretty cool thing. Overall, like, I'm just not sure if it's very good when you're behind. You get at least one unit stolen, but then that unit does come back if your opponent has a bunch of other stuff. So, like, if your opponent's basically doing okay on board, but is behind on cards, like they just don't have a lot of removal in their setup, then Voprex Hope's End just ends them, and that's pretty good. It does definitely deny your opponent all hope if they don't have something like Feeding Time or, like, any sort of like good removal in their list. And also if their removal is like situational, like Permafrost, there are a lot of ways that this just does not go well. So yeah, seems pretty useful on those fronts. The 8/8 stat line means that the game ends pretty fast. I think this card just ends the game very quickly, and that's the kind of thing that you want to see out of an 8-drop. I also think that it does not win when you're behind, and that's something that is pretty important for an 8-drop to do. So interesting, but maybe not amazing. Okay, the other cards that the other card that we want to show off is Xulta Arcanum. New site, 7 cost, Fire Time, and Justice. So Arcanum in Xulta, that's delightful. It also has Bren's Agenda, which I think basically confirms that Xulta has shifted versions of other characters from like basically what we've seen. Like it is an alternate dimension with its own Roland, its own Seraph, its own other things. And it seems like Roland is still dead in this universe, which I do appreciate. But yeah, like we have like a Bren in the Xulta Arcanum that is Fire Time and Justice associated, and this is a 5-drop 7 cost that says when you attack with one or more unit, play a random power card from your deck. The agenda is Xulta Convoy, Bren's Brilliance, a card we do not know anything about yet, but probably has something maybe related to Brilliant Idea in terms of like card draw for power. Hard to say exactly what's going to be happening there. And Vital Arcana, which is a draw 2, gain some life. So Xulta Arcanum is a 5 health site that also creates its own blockers. Not a bad deal. Doesn't seem to have any sort of removal attached to it, which means that you have to be somewhat ahead to be playing it, and also it's a 7-drop site. But it has enough health to really last in most situations. There are not really any 5 health sites that are not like good. Like this is something that was, I think Howling Peak had 5 health at first, and that was just like absolutely absurd. This is the kind of thing that like really turns off hope for a lot of like the sort of more aggro-oriented setups and can do some pretty wild things. The health that it gains you, the fact that you get some like interesting units, so you actually get Xulta Convoy to attack and play the random power from your deck. I think it's one of the less powerful sites, but based off of what Bren's Brilliance is, that could change in a very big way. And it's more likely to play the red Bren, which is going to be extra power for every card you play. That has not traditionally been a particularly effective card. We will see if it's going to be any good here. I'm curious to see if this site is any good. It seems like this is going to be a part of a cycle of 3-color sites, and we've had a couple of other ones sort of shown off. So this is something that is very interesting, and I'm really hoping that it's a powerful setup. I love the Praxis Arcanum. I don't have any attachment to the Xulta Arcanum just yet, but I'm pretty interested to see how it turns out, and whether or not there's going to be an interesting Bren in there, or if it's going to be the 7/5 Bren that does some wild things. Okay, we have revealed, I think, all the mechanics for Trials of Grodov already, but there is one more thing that we get to talk about, and that is Emblems, the new power source in this setup. So Emblems are a new power. They are a ping power, so they will deal damage to you. That's not a pain power, I guess would be what you'd call it. So when you play it, it is not depleted under any circumstances, but you do take 1 damage when you play it. With Decimate, however, if you wish to, and you have the influence correct to do it, you get to draw a new card and play that card with a particular battle skill. Or you don't get to play it, but you get to draw it. So after you have 3-time influence, you can use your Emblem of Grodov to decimate yourself, reduce your max power by 1, and then draw a 3-cost card that has some sort of interesting ability, or a 2-cost card rather, that has some sort of interesting ability because your maximum power will be reduced by 1. So to give you an idea of what those cards look like, here's the Earth Elemental, 2/2 Exalted with 3-time influence. So you'll have the influence, so that time influence is not a big issue. Like basically, like you're playing with a sort of Waystone type effect. Should be really interesting on that front. This is a free card with your card. The cost of it is in health, which means that you might have to like actually put a little bit more health gain in your decks, which is not typically a thing that you want to do very often, but the power of the effect is definitely worth it, and this is a really interesting thing that's going to help you out if you're playing more aggressive decks that are feeling pretty good about decimating. Also, this enables you to decimate more often, which actually does matter because there are a lot of cards that are very, very comfy with decimating frequently, and we'll talk about that, I think, with the last emblem on the list. So, Emblem of Shapka, you get a 3/3 Ash Elemental with Overwhelm, but again, you take the damage. Ash Elemental with Overwhelm is a 3/3 for 2. So not bad for stat lines. This is definitely a reasonable option. Essentially, in draft, 3/3s for 3 are usually very powerful cards, so this is something that you feel pretty good about in draft because it's going to spar very well with everything else that you are playing off of these emblems. I think this is probably going to be one of the strongest emblems in draft. Emblem of Makar gets you a 2/2 Deadly Elemental, which is Death Elemental. That's going to be pretty interesting. I would say that overall, that's going to be something where you get some pretty wild bonuses out of it. Like, Deadly is typically a very good stat line because it trades with almost anything. As similar to the Corendon Merchant, you get like the ability to spar with any one of your opponent's big mid-range units and stall the game out a little bit while just playing your power and taking a little bit of damage. On the other hand, Deadly is generally used to prevent you from taking damage, and Emblem of Makar means that you take more damage, so there's some potential for that to go badly for you. Emblem of Linray, gain Primal and take 1 damage. Decimate, you get a 3/1 Ice Elemental with Aegis, which straight up, I would say not that great. Like, it does trade pretty well with other things. It plays similar to Emblem of Shapka, but also, like, it's just not great on units, so it's probably not as good in a draft environment. At least it's got that Aegis, so you can do some pretty interesting things with weapons and, like, Exalted stuff. It is a very good Exalted carrier, because Aegis units are just generally going to stick around longer and make Exalted a little bit more important. So, yeah, that's a pretty interesting one. I'll show off the art for that one as well. I actually really like the Ice Elemental art. It's got 6 arms. It's got a lot of interesting stuff going on. Okay, and the final one, which we save for last because we do have a spoiler of our own after all, is Emblem of Kadosh. Gangrene, take a damage. Decimate, if you have 3 green, create and draw a 2/1 wind elemental with flying. Flying units are generally very useful, and that makes this emblem probably a little bit more powerful than some of the other ones. I would say this is probably the most powerful of the 3 in draft, just because it creates a simple flyer for you that you can do some pretty wild things with. And like overall, this is like a pretty interesting option that gives you a decent amount of damage and gets you a decent amount of other things going on. So like, yeah, this card seems decently strong on that respect. Also, Justice has a pretty serious Decimate theme, which means that if you're playing with Decimate Power, you can trigger Decimate more often, and that's going to be very, very important because there are cards in Justice that will allow you to decimate without actually decimating. There are cards in Justice that care about you decimating, and every time that you decimate, you get particular benefits. And there are cards in Justice that just like basically are going to be pretty happy with playing a lot of power. Like you have cards like Reclaim that allow you to get your maximum power up very, very high while also decimating down. To that extent, we have seen a lot of pretty aggressive paladins and other interesting options. And that leads us to our spoiler for today, which is very similarly one of those options. So let's see if we can get that up. All right, so this card is called Nivea. Nivea's Inquisitor. 3-cost 2/2. When you decimate your power, Nivea's Inquisitor gets +2/+2, turning it from a 3-cost 2/2 to a 3-cost 4/4. So anytime that you decimate off of any power, you can then get an additional bonus on this card. Mastery 12, double Nivea's Inquisitor's strength and health, turning it into a much larger unit, and assumably one at like Champion of Progress levels of health. So probably at worst this ends up as something like an 8/8, but it also notably gets to decimate very quickly depending on what else you're doing. So some things that you can do with this, for example, you can play a Justice Decimate Emblem into a Decimate Paladin, immediately get a 6/6, and then the Mastery will trigger very, very quickly to get you a 12/12 out of a very simple option. As a draft uncommon, this card seems like it's going to be very, very aggressive, get you a lot of power out of your decimates, and actually get you just tons and tons of value in terms of getting you bigger and bigger units very, very quickly. Large, fatty vanilla units are really, really interesting, and so this is something that like definitely does some wild stuff with that. In addition, you can repeat masteries by doing things like safe return, teleport, that kind of stuff. You can double this card up in a number of different interesting ways and potentially get it up to like Order of the Spire levels of value. But it is a card that you can play down as a 3-cost 4/4 because I'm pretty sure that you can decimate before your opponent can respond with any sort of effective ability, thanks to cards like Emblems that allow you to basically decimate without any sort of effect occurring. So really, really interesting on that front. There's an Exalted Pump spell that actually gets you a big pile of benefits. There is an Exalted Decimate spell that will, or not an Exalted Decimate spell, but there's a Decimate spell that gives you +1/+1 for each of your enemy's units, and is just going to be really, really wild here. There's just a bunch of interesting options to play around with Nivea's Inquisitor, particularly in a limited format. So, yeah, it's gonna be pretty interesting. This is interesting in Argenport. You can do things like immortalize this card to give it Exalted. That is very, very true. You can also immortalize other paladins to give you the decimate going on. And yeah, like that is just like a pretty wild pile of stuff. There's just a ton of interesting things happening there, which is pretty cool stuff. Okay. Yeah, so that's Nivea's Inquisitor. I think it's mostly a limited card, but it does have some potential in Paladin Decimate decks. There are certainly some Paladin decks that specifically care about decimating, and of course if you can decimate for free, that's a really big deal, and that makes Nivea's Inquisitor a very terrifying vanilla unit. Certainly the Overwhelm and like giving it Overwhelm and other stats is very, very important. If you can give it something like Exalted, it becomes a very, very large weapon, which is quite beneficial. And yeah, overall that seems like something that's going to be quite ridiculous, and you can do some wild things with it. Oh yeah, we're noting that we skipped a card. I do know where that is. We're going to find it real quick. It is called Soulflame Rider. Yeah, and this one's just a 6/6 for 9, with that every time you've decimated power, it costs 3 less. So notably, there are a lot of things that you can do with all of these decimate cards that just like Justice really likes decimating a lot over and over again, so I think that's pretty interesting stuff. So yeah, this is a card that plays really well with all of those decimate themes. Could be a really reasonable 3-drop in those types of situations, and then like when you got draft bombs like this, there's going to be no reason not to play that. Okay, so that's pretty much it for today. We're gonna call it here. I think we might have a few more cards, so we'll call those out in order. But let's see if we can get to those. It's gonna take me a second to find them, so this will probably be a cut. All right, we got Sodi's Choice. 2-cost, time and primal. Play Sandbind on an enemy unit or negate an enemy fast spell. Right away, yeah, that's pretty amazing. Like, Sandbind on an enemy unit is a really reasonable trick. I think this is really strong in a draft environment in particular, but also it's a great way to just ground anything that is going to be, like, not doing stuff. Basically, Sandbind turns off flying for a unit, which then allows you to crush it with a wide variety of interesting, large, mid-range units. Elysian really wants something like that, and they also want something that negates fast spells so that they can protect their really, really big units. This is a really, really solid choice, and I think it's probably one of the better choices that's been shown off so far. We have another choice in here. Let me find it real quick. Nahid's Choice is the other one. So the Xenon Choice is bigger. Good. Nahid's Choice plays 2 1/1 cultists, or the enemy player discards a spell or sight of your choice from their hand. So notably a little bit better than Sabotage, and the first thing that can hit both spells and sights at 2. Certainly seems quite reasonable, similar to Treachery in terms of like the overall value that you can get out of the hand. The playing 2 1/1 cultists is less useful, but Xenon now has a reasonable amount of really interesting options for like Praxis Arcanum and like a bunch of like interesting, just good Xenon options. I think this card is very strong. There's a lot of potential for it. Like, certainly seems like a really, really good one in terms of being able to mess up your opponent's stuff. And it also gives us really reasonable sight answers, which I think is very important. Like, interaction with sights has not been super heavy so far. They were printed a little after some of the other like solid interaction for them would exist, so this is something that allows you to get rid of those sights quite easily and mess with your opponent's strategy in a pretty big way. So super happy to see it. It also gives you a lot of information about your opponent's hand. I would say you're going to be using the bottom half of that more than the top half a lot, and that is really interesting. But if you can find some uses for the bottom half in the deck, if you can balance that deck around those two options, that's going to be something that's pretty interesting overall. Finally, we have Outcast Fortress, which is a 3-cost. Your curses cost 1 less. Zelia's Agenda. Zelia is a 2/4 that I believe bonds with Unseen, but you pay a certain amount to play a -2, -1 on people. Might be a -1, -1. I think it's a -2, -1. But Zelia's Agenda is Pilfer, Protect, and Cruelty. I can't remember what Cruelty is. I believe we have actually seen it. Pilfer steals a card off the top. Yeah, it's a 4/5 deadly. Okay. 4/5 deadly, your curses cost 1 less. Gets a lot of interesting options. Oh yeah, she did get buffed, that's right, so that's wild. Okay, regardless, this is Unseen Curses and Griffins Sight deck, which gives you a really, really reasonable option to go into that Sight and Griffin and whole setup. I think you got some really, really good things. So yeah, Pilfer, Protect, and Cruelty. Protect is very, very solid on a Sight, I would say. Pilfer gets you a free card. Nothing wrong with just a little bit of extra draw. This is effectively like a Seek power on a Sight, which is definitely not a terrible thing to happen. And Cruelty, I believe, is some sort of removal that allows you to keep Outcast Fortress alive a little bit longer. I don't believe it's Torture. No, Torture is the -4, -1, so Cruelty is something else. I'm sure that we just saw this card recently, but I don't remember what it does. Regardless, this site seems stronger than the other sites that we have been shown so far. There are a couple of other like 3-cost options, and yeah, like it seems like it's not unreasonable. There's definitely some interesting things that you can do with it. But regardless, everyone is telling me that we have not seen Cruelty yet, so good to know, good to know. But yeah, there are also a couple of others that are in Spanish. We might talk about them when we have English versions of them, but for the moment, I'm not going to do the translation work on that. Regardless, there is a dragon site that cares about how many dragons you have in red, in Fire, Time, and Shadow, and that's going to be really, really interesting to see as well. So I think this basically confirms that there is a cycle of 3-color sites, which all of whom seem to enforce some sort of really interesting strategy. For Fire, you have or for the Fire, Time, and I believe it's Justice? Fire, Time, and Justice, you have the ability to play just a pile of interesting options and basically get a bunch of power for decimate effects. With Outcast Fortress, you are enforcing like a big pile of useful things with Unseen and Curses. The Nightmaw or the Voprex site is... maybe it's a Mullet Nakova site. The dragon site allows you to like enforce like the big dragon strategies. There's a lot of really cool stuff happening here. All right, this has gone way too long, and I need to get over to like see my partner. So I am really, really happy with all of the Fox cards that are coming out. Flame of Xulta is looking to be an amazing, amazing new set. I'm very, very excited about the setup. I think we're probably going to be launching on Switch pretty soon, so like it'll probably happen maybe with the release, but it should release next week. We're all assuming Thursday. We're not really sure. Regardless, tomorrow is going to be the big pre-release event with all of the pre-release decks, so stay tuned for that. We will be playing tomorrow and should be starting around 3 p.m. PST. Thank you so much for watching. I had a really fun time doing this, and I'm really looking forward to Flame of Xulta. So see you guys next time, and or see all of you next time, and hope you have a lovely, lovely evening. Thank you so much for watching. Cheers.